All right. This is the one of the, in my opinion, at least for me, if you're using this tool system of spiritual development of the Kabbalah and the Tarot, this is a pretty tough path. Remember that we're here in Malkuth. Now, this path resides here between Malkuth and Netzach, as shown in the picture. But you also have to remember that before we get into this, that here, this is the intellectual side. So we've already done the path of judgment with the fire of Shin and the path of the sun, the fires of from the intellect, so to speak. And now we are starting on the emotional side, the emotional kind of initiation. Also remember too, over here on the right, but also remember too that these initiations, all these paths are happening to our physical body. They're happening to us not just consciously, but biologically as well. So this path can be a little tough for some. So let's get into it. What does Robert Wang have to say about this? So some of the quick correspondences are the path of Kaf, the Hebrew letter Kaf, which is the moon, or the 18th key of the tarot. The path color is crimson ultraviolet. The related sound is B natural. The sign is Pisces, or mutable water. Its esoteric meaning, or the hidden meaning, is the back of the head or the ear. The simple letter is sleep in Hebrew. Its esoteric title is the ruler of flux and reflux, the child of the sons of the mighty. On the 32 paths of wisdom, the 29th path is the corporeal intelligence, so called because it forms every body which is formed beneath the whole set of worlds and the increment of them. The path of Kaf connects Netzach victory with Malkuth the kingdom, and is described not only as the victory of the material world, but as the deceptive effect of the apparent power of material forces. Crowley calls this path the gateway of resurrection, the threshold of life, or spiritual rebirth. And this spiritual rebirth can be considered at two levels. First, in the course of incarnation, it is the stage of the soul's organization of the physical body which it will inhabit. It is a sleep, as attributed to Kaf by the Sefer Yetzirah, preceding the waking mortal consciousness, a form of pre-consciousness differentiating into matter from the collective unconscious of Netzach. Second, in terms of the spiritually developing individual, it is a conquest of the phantoms reflected from the material world, what the Golden Dawn describes as the child of the sons of the mighty, meaning the creations of the created. This is a watery path of probation, where the student must face and conquer the phantoms of the darkest recesses of his own mind, as well as those of the race. In that sense, it can be a terrible and frightening path, involving real dangers to the emotional stability of those who aren't strong enough to handle this experience. Such inner disturbances may actually result in serious physical problems. On the other hand, tradition states that the successful treading of this path confers the powers of bewitchments and casting illusions. When we slay the dragons of the deep recesses of our sleep consciousness and understand their mechanisms, we gain the capacity to manipulate those qualities in ourselves as well as in others. So here is the path where we could say that we have to really deal with our deep emotional issues, not only as an individual, but as a collective. The traumas, the programs, and all of these things, when dealt with, will create a new connection to the higher self, but also give us a biological response. Because after all, these initiatory paths come straight from Malkuth, which represents the earth and our physical bodies. But the meaning of Kaf is the back of the head. It is behind the head itself, which is, we know the head being Resh, the sun. So what is symbolized by the moon is anterior to the bright intellectual awareness of the sun. At this level of the tree, the moon only reflects the light of the sun. The path at the center of the card is going from the dark side of the moon towards the light side on which the sun shines directly. Here, it should be noted that Crowley disagreed with the Golden Dawn and Arthur Edward Waite and their interpretations, which say that the moon is in its increase. The rationale given is that the crayfish or the crab is the symbol of Cancer, meaning that when the sun is in Pisces, the moon will be increasing in Cancer. So the crayfish emerging from the water at one level was intended to mean the sun below the horizon, as he ever is when the moon is increasing above. Another important idea expressed in the Golden Dawn manuscripts is that of the crab imagery developed from the scarab or dung beetle. Now, Crowley developed this idea, and you can see it in his cards for sure, making the dung beetle central to his card and emphasizing the darker aspects of this path. He called this the waning moon of witchcraft and the abominable deeds. The abominable deeds. The poison darkness, which is the condition of the rebirth of light. The rebirth of the light out of a hideous condition. The rebirth of light out of a hideous and abominable darkness and his primary concern, one admirably symbolized by the beetle, which is a reference to Kefra, father of the gods, and the great god of creation and resurrection. The beetle, or the scarabaeus called the beetle or the scarabaeus called Kefrera by the Egyptians, was the god's key symbol. And as a species, this is a beetle which lays its eggs in a ball of crap and then pushes it along, and from which the eggs eventually hatch as they are subjected to the warmth of the sun. The dung ball was considered to be like the sun itself, for it contained all that was necessary for the growth and nourishment. Just like fertilizer, it contains everything that's necessary for the growth and nourishment and the balancing energy of plant life. In some respects, the form emerging from the waters is both the highest and the lowest. It is the very originator of life, as it is Kefra, the god who is said to have emerged as a beetle from the watery mass of Nu. It is the highest creative force, beginning its material self-expression as the lowest organic form. The crayfish means the organic evolution of the human race. It also refers to the cellular development of the physical vehicle from the inner roots of nature, and as an originator of form. Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter, relates to Chesed. The very earliest Golden Dawn papers, the so-called cipher manuscripts, say of Pisces, by it the waters of Chesed flow down, meaning that its primary formative consciousness at the lowest level of the tree. Of course, the most important tarot reference to the moon is with the High Priestess, the path of Gimel, leading directly from God the Father to God the Son. So the priestess, or the High Priestess, we know has the lunar energy in it as well, but that card represents this path from Kether to Tifereth. So you have the moon card here, and then you have the High Priestess up there. I know it gets a little confusing though. The High Priestess is the source of the crystal clear waters of consciousness emerging from the Godhead. The same waters are seen here in the moon, but they're polluted. This is not to imply that there's anything intrinsically evil on this path. Rather, its phantoms relate to the density of the physical body, the compound organism affected by all three paths leading into Malkuth, judgment, the moon, and the universe. And remember where those are, right? We just went through those. Judgment. We're on the moon now. And the universe. All three paths affect us physically too. One intellectually, the other emotionally. And here's the balance in the middle, but all three paths affect us on a biological level. This has been described as the process of traveling the paths, which has a definite effect on the body. The physical vehicle is subtly modified as the light descends into it, and as the personality becomes increasingly aware of the presence and activities of the higher self. And this is what happens when we start to wake up. Now, you could use this system, or you can use any spiritual system, or even do an out-of-body work or consciousness exploration, and soon you realize that the higher self isn't somewhere separate from you at all. It's right here with you, and it's giving you signs and trying to help you along the whole way. The idea, after going through all these paths, is that you start to realize it and become more aware of it. Relative to the human body, though, the path of the moon is an organizing, formative one. It is described in the 32 Paths of Wisdom as the corporeal intelligence, which Paul Foster Case tells us means body consciousness. He notes also that the root of the word corporeal in Hebrew means to rain upon. And each of the three cards, yods, are shown raining down upon the path. Or as Pausanias described, these might be the tears of the moon goddess, which cause the Nile to rise and fall. There is in any event a general agreement that something descends from the moon to the earth on this path, as is symbolized by the falling yods. In Arthur Edward Waite's card, there are 15 yods, which I have no doubt, but is definitely a possible reference to the bondage of matter symbolized by the 15th key, the devil. And so here, you see those 15 yods falling upon the earth. All these little yods here. The Golden Dawn card that this author that we're reading now actually created, so he's telling you exactly what it means, shows 4 yods, one for the powers of each of the 4 worlds. So this one shows 4 yods, one for the powers of each of the 4 worlds. Crowley uses 9 as a reference to Yesod. So Crowley has 9 coming down here, which is a reference to the sphere of Yesod, which is actually the lunar sphere of the moon. He describes these as drops of impure blood, meaning the cycle of menstruation. He describes the path as a stream of serum tinged with blood. Indeed, the activity of menstruation and its dark blood is intimately connected to this path, the path of childbirth, presided over by the Greek goddess Artemis as the sister of Apollo, the sun. Artemis was the moon. And like her Roman counterpart Diana, she was a goddess of the hunt, traveling through brutal and mountainous woods with her pack of hounds. Thus is childbirth linked with the most savage aspects of nature. The goddess, like the path, can be vicious and unforgiving, her legend being filled with the qualities at once dark and vindictive. Any breach of her regulations was immediately and ferociously punished. So, from the standpoint of Greek legend, the dogs of the moon may be considered those of Artemis, ready to attack and destroy men who displease her. The very idea is barbaric and uncivilized, as is the path of Kaf. This is a primitive path, one of raw animal nature. It is a path of animal instincts, the law of the jungle, so to speak. Passions, energies, all of these things uncontrolled by intellectual, moral, and ethical considerations, unbalanced. This can be a very cruel path, showing us aspects of ourselves which society forces us to repress. And remember, if we get too emotional, it can become very pathological. If we are run by our animal natures, it can become sociopathic, pathological, and very cruel. But we also were taught to repress these things too. So where is the balance? Having society force us to repress these, but these are an integral and undeniable part of our human makeup. Yet we approach the images and lessons of this path with our whole being, applying reason to that which we encounter, as we apply feeling to that which is encountered on the path of judgment. So what did Robert Wang just say right there? Remember, here, if we are on this path, we are going to, this is the intellectual path over here, remember? The path in the middle pillar is balanced. The path of Shin and the path of the sun are of a fiery intellect, which does shine light on our emotions. But if we give in to the dark sides of these paths, we become overly intellectual and pathological. So now we're over here, same thing. Our emotions and our subconscious stuff and our animal natures shines a light on our intellect. But if we become too balanced and too overly emotional to the dark sides of these paths, it can become pathological, neurotic, and even harmful. All of these things have to come into our awareness. So just like that's exactly what he's saying there. Yet we approach the images and lessons of this path with our whole being, applying reason from the other side, remember, to that which we encounter, as we apply feeling to that which is encountered on the path of judgment. The moon is one of the cards for which tradition has provided a very definite structure, both the Golden Dawn and Arthur Edward Waite cards being wholly dependent on the design shown in the Marseille versions. The two dogs in Waite's deck they are a dog and a wolf, stand threateningly beneath a personified moon between two desolate towers. A crayfish is in the water below. Here, it is at least interesting to observe that in the Marseille version, there's no path that's shown, and it is only by inference, by intuition, that one realizes that the crayfish will eventually pass between those two dogs. Mathers and Crowley were in agreement that these should actually be considered the jackals of Anubis, the scavengers of the dead. Anubis was the jackal god and the great god of the underworld, charged with both the judgment and the embalming of the deceased. In the tarot, this means the natural deterioration of the physical body and death, the return of its energy into the unseen, as well as a suggestion of correspondence with the paths of Shin and judgment. The implication is that the activity of natural forces on the body in death is concurrent with the weighing of the soul on the path. Anubis is a very complex god of lunar opposites, as is suggested by Crowley's dual figures. Anubis is a god of light and of darkness, of death and of resurrection, whose cult was a fascination to those ancient societies in the shadow of Egypt. Describing the subtleties of this deity's cult to the Romans, Plutarch wrote this, quote, "By Anubis they understand the horizontal circle, which divides the invisible part of the world, which they call Nephitis, from the visible, to which they give the name Isis. And as this circle equally touches upon the confines of both light and darkness, it may be looked upon as common to them both, and from this circumference arose that resemblance which they imagine between Anubis and the dog, it being observed of this animal that he is equally watchful by day and night. In short, the Egyptian Anubis seems to be of much the same power and nature as the Greek Hecate, a deity common both to the celestial and infernal regions." So, pursuant to the idea of Anubis and resurrection, there is a definite relationship to the Christ legend. It can be said, however, whimsically, that in obscure medieval symbolism, the lobster is a symbol of the risen Christ. And one must be exceedingly cautious in dismissing such symbolism out of hand because of the tarot's very elusive anyways, but unquestionably medieval. In the 14th century, every symbol, however occult or hidden it was related to Christ. So one way or the other, birth, death, and resurrection are pivotal concepts on the path of the moon. These are not symbolic processes, they are biological, and occur in the darkness and the light of our sense perception. The energy process, a cyclic wave motion, is shown by Crowley as a pattern of both above and below, linked by the beetle of the sun. So to reiterate the meaning of this murky path in the most simple of terms, this is the natural energy from which our physical bodies develop in the womb. It is a process that is continual throughout our lives as cells die and are replaced. The work of this path is ended with the dissolution of energy back to its source, which is Netzach. To understand this path is to understand the relationship of our personality consciousness to the physical, but which is built for each incarnation, a very difficult undertaking for most people who perceive themselves as having existence only through their physical bodies and nothing else. Here, the meaning of this simple letter, Kaf, which means sleep, gives an important clue. During the cyclic phase of withdrawal of consciousness from the physical, most people continue to act on information and fantasies closely related to their bodily existence. Their dreams are filled with the shades of matter which, once consciously transcended, is the conquest of the path of the moon. Think about what he's saying there. So last night I just did a video that with William Buellman talking about what do we do in the astral? We take our beliefs and everything from the earths with us. We do the same thing in the dream world. When we move into the astral, we take all of our ideas and our beliefs and our habits and our addictions into the astral world, whether we're alive or not. Even in death, we'll take these things there. And what are they saying here? To understand this path is to understand the relationship of our personality consciousness to the physical vehicle built for each incarnation. This is very difficult. People only perceive themselves as having a physical existence. This is why the letter Kaf means sleep, and this gives us a clue. During the cyclic phase of withdrawal of consciousness from the physical, whether it's sleep or death, most people continue to act on the information and fantasies that were closely related to their physical existence. Their dreams are filled with shades of matter, which once consciously transcended, is the conquest of the path of the moon. Their astral life after death, they reenact out their physical existence and their beliefs, which, when consciously transcended, is the conquest of the path of the moon. Okay? So, this is why this is a tough one. First, the spirit, the phantom, the spirit, our body, they're not separate. Consciousness is all of these things. The physical body is a vehicle that we use to grow our spirits and our awareness into the higher self. If we're doing it properly. If we're not doing it properly and we're unbalanced and we're letting our unconscious programming, our fears, our nightmares, our addictions, all of our crap and our animal natures run the show, this can be a very tough path. Okay, so let's pull Crowley's card up here. Well, I still have all these yodes, but I mean, if we go over the symbolism, we can see the dog and the wolf in Arthur Edward Waite's card. We can see the path. We can see the crab rising out of the water, which is Cancer, pretty much rising out of Pisces, or the light of the sun, which is underneath the earth during the rising of the moon, the light of the sun rising out of Pisces, having to deal with the animal nature of ourselves. And it is kind of cool to see that that path is a long ways, right? It stretches, but it does go past those dogs. We can actually pass it. So in divination, a lot of times when you pull this card, you'll know, this is where the querent, or it'll have a lot to do with unconscious stuff, fears, deep programming, maybe people acting upon their animal nature as a whole. Just people being unconsciously run, depending on the pull, or it could mean that we're overcoming these things, right? All right, so let's pull up Crowley's card so we can zoom into this one a little bit more. Colorful card, right? But he does show the flux and reflux. I'll have it noted, too, that I don't really remember which book it was, but Carl Jung also speaks of something about the moon and the lunar waters, saying that he went through this thing during active imagination where he found himself caught in this like cycle of birth and death and resurrection, where it was just a cycle. Like once his consciousness goes into these waters, there's really nothing he can do but sit around and wait until he's born again, almost like it was chaos. I need to find that. I think it was in the Red Book, though. I think. All right, so in Lon Malo Duquette's card, a 2/18, the moon, the ruler of flux and reflux, the child of the sons of the mighty, the zodiacal trump of Pisces. Jupiter rules, Venus exalted. This original design is the waning moon below a path which leads between two towers guarded by jackals from the sea, wherein a scarabus marches forwards through the land. The Hebrew letter Kaf means back of the head, also means sleep too. The tree of life, path 29, joining Nutsack victory to Malkuth the kingdom. The colors in all four worlds are crimson, ultraviolet, buff, fleck silver white, light translucent, pinkish brown, and stone color. Let the illusion of the world pass over thee, unheeded, as thou goest from midnight to the morning. And this trump, her lowest avatar, she joins the earthly sphere of Nutsack with Malkuth, the moon of witchcraft and abominable deeds. She is the poison darkness, which is the condition of the rebirth of light. Lon Malo Duquette goes on to say, there is no doubt about it. This is a spooky card. It represents the light that darkness creates. It is the light that illuminates your dreams and your nightmares. We recall that the trump attributed to the moon is actually a 2-2, the priestess, or in Waite's cards, the high priestess. She is the waxing moon and represents Luna in her higher aspect, that of forming a link between the human and the divine. The path of the priestess crosses the abyss and joins Tiferet and Kether. A 2-18, the moon, is a very different aspect of Luna. And the most cheerful thing I can think to say about it is things will change, just like the moon or the cycles of the moon, or like flux and reflux. Duquette says, now, before many of my brothers and sisters in the craft take offense, let me hasten to point out that the witchcraft Crowley is referring to in the above quote is not the nature-loving and life-affirming religion of the neo-pagan movements that have proliferated around the world since his death in 1947. It's more the imagined witchcraft that is spawned in the tortured and obscene fantasies of the fanatic witch hunters. So more like the evil version of the witches that they all think about, right? In fact, if you have a dream where a witch is trying to get you and it's evil and scary, you're tapping into the dark side of this path for sure. The moonlight of a 2-18 is that which illuminates the phantasmagoric nightmares of all of us who cannot acknowledge the dark horrors of our own fears. The moon card shows a path through and beyond this nightmare, but it is not an easy path, and the myths of all ages and cultures prove that this journey through the poison darkness, quote, is an obligatory chapter in every hero's quest, as Crowley warns us, quote, this path is guarded by taboo. She is uncleanliness and sorcery. Upon the hills are the black towers of nameless mystery, of horror and of fear. All prejudice, all superstition, dead tradition, and ancestral loathing all combine to darken her face before the eyes of men. It needs unconquerable courage to begin to tread this path. So you need courage to tread this path. Freda Harris's rendering is disturbingly haunting, but it is not too dissimilar to the traditional image. The path runs between two towers, guarded by twin figures of the Egyptian god Anubis, god of embalming and the guardian of the cities of the dead. Poisoned blood drips from the dying moon. The creature walking out of the water at the bottom of the card represents a scarab beetle, symbolic of the Egyptian god Khepra, who is the god of the sun at midnight. Traditional decks usually show a crayfish or even a lobster instead of the scarab, and the symbolism of the Lord of the Sun at midnight becomes somewhat lost in memories of melted butter. I must confess, though, Harris's scarab doesn't even look very scarabby at all. In fact, it looks like a water spider. Nevertheless, it carries the sun out of the dark water, and by doing so assures us that this awful night, this awful dark night of the soul, will eventually come to an end. In the Book of Thoth, Crowley also assures that the courageous seeker in his last words concerning this card. One is reminded, here's his quote here, one is reminded of the mental echo of the subconscious realization of that supreme iniquity which mystics have constantly celebrated in their accounts of the dark night of the soul. But the best men, the true men, do not consider the matter in such terms at all. Whatever horrors may afflict the soul, whatever abominations may excite the loathing of the heart, whatever terrors may assail the mind, the answer is the same at every stage. How splendid is this adventure. That's all Duquette says about the moon. So what I wanted to do is do something that we haven't done yet. And I don't know if I have this pulled up. Well, there's Wang's card there. But I would like to get into Paul Foster Case's view of the moon. So Paul Foster Case says this, and if you guys really want to learn the tarot, like on a deep analytical level, I do recommend these two books I've been talking about in this series a lot. But if you want to go even deeper, Paul Foster Case, Builders of the Adytum, their whole series on the tarot and the Kabbalah is magnificent. Case goes on to say this, that the 18th key symbolizes the fourth stage of spiritual unfoldment. After one has realized that the condition of bondage to appearance. Key 15, the devil is but an illusion. When by the flesh of spiritual illumination, false structures of our wrong thinking and wrong acting were demolished in key 16. Then came a period of quietness, as one that comes after the storm, when new relations become revealed to us through meditations in key 17. After that begins the process of organization. I love Case's stuff because he really talks about the alchemical process a lot, step by step, okay? So here used, organization does not mean the association of human beings into groups or societies. It refers rather to the organization of the various parts of a single human body into a higher type of organism than that which is spontaneously provided by the general averages of ordinary evolution. He's talking about becoming something more than human after you conquer this path. The practical application of the principles of ageless wisdom is aimed at a change in the human organism. Creatures in the evolutionary scale below man are incapable of any great degree of self-modification. Animals and plants brought under the influence of man may be considerably modified in a relatively short period of time, but they always show a tendency to revert right back to their normal behaviors when our human influence is removed upon them. So the great art of practical occultism is concerned with the production of a higher, finer, more sensitive and responsive type of human being. This is not affected by eugenic measures. It is not by selection and breeding, but by the direct action of man's will and imagination upon his own vehicle of flesh and blood that the transformation is effected. This transformation is the outcome of the working together of universal forces and not merely the result of personal efforts. Yet the culmination of this work requires the introduction of the personal factor. No man accomplishes the great work until he himself sees the principles and laws that must be applied. This accomplishment is possible by the exercise of imagination. It is by imagination that we make our desires and aspirations clear and definite. These mental images are the patterns which we pass into the subconsciousness, which is the bodybuilder and the controller of function. If our patterns are clear and definite, and we keep them intact, subconsciousness builds a body to correspond to them. This does not mean that we can sit still and do nothing but hold mental images, and this is going to produce our results or the changes in our bodies. It does mean that when our images are vivid, they not only provide us with patterns for bodily transformation, but also impel us into courses of action which help to bring about such changes. For example, a boy cherishes the image of being a concert pianist. This image dominates his every action, so he goes willingly through the practice that would be mere drudgery to others. The practice affects the muscular structure of his hands, arms, and legs. It brings many subtle changes in the centers of sight and hearing. It affects many other groups of nerves and muscle cells, but ultimately, he becomes exactly what he imagined, because he has built for himself by action corresponding to imagination the specially conditioned body of a concert pianist. Now, this same principle holds true in every other instance. A prize fighter is dominated by his imagery of being a champion, and so is a poet. Everything that human beings achieve is accomplished through some kind of bodily activity, and each type of activity is made possible through the development of corresponding types of physical structures. This is as true of the prophet and the seer as it is of anybody else. Whatever your object in life may be, you will achieve it when you have built a physical vehicle which can transform the life power into particular kinds of action corresponding to those mental images that you kept. The number 18 expresses the potency of the number 8 working through the number 1. Thus, it represents the law of suggestion, represented by key 8, as being applied through the directive activity of attention, represented by key 1. In lesson 5 of this course, Paul Foster Case hinted that subconsciousness is the bodybuilder, and that it is always amenable to suggestion. Throughout those lessons, too, Paul Foster Case repeatedly emphasized that the thought that it is by conscious self-direction that all the practical work of occultism is accomplished. In reference to the organization of a finer and more responsive physical vehicle, this self-direction is the application of a principle long ago enunciated by Lamarck, who wrote this, quote, "The production of a new organ in an animal body results from the supervention of a new want continuing itself felt, and a new movement which this want gives birth to and encourages. Effort may be, in a measure, unconscious or instinctive, but must be in large measure conscious, being made with a mental purpose to produce some desired result." And I'll explain all this stuff here in a minute, but the Hebrew letter Kof, pronounced as Kof, means back of the head. It alludes to the fact that some of the most important organs of the human body are in the hindered part of the skull, and this part of the head houses the posterior lobes of the cerebrum and the cerebellum. The posterior lobes of the cerebrum contain the sight center, so it's literally true that our real eyes are in the back of our heads. Just below the posterior lobe of the cerebrum is a knot of nervous tissue called the medulla oblongata, which unites the brain to the spinal cord and its branches, and is thus the connecting link between the higher centers of sensation, thought, and action in the head, and the subordinate centers in the body. The medulla itself is indeed a knot, presenting many intricate problems to anatomists and physiologists and psychologists, some of which are probably unlikely to be solved at all by those who depend upon ordinary methods of observation. Faulty as the ordinary methods of studying the nervous system must be, because the tissues examined under the microscope are taken from dead bodies. It has been found that the medulla governs respiration, that it regulates the movement of the heart, that it contains the principal center which controls the circulation of the blood throughout the body. Besides these, it has other functions of basic importance in the maintenance of the body. Thus, this knot of nerve cells at the back of the head is really what keeps us alive, for its functions are carried on without interruption, even while we're asleep. So, sleep, therefore, is assigned to the letter Kof, because what consciousness remains active in personality during sleep has its most important centers in the back of the head. Sleep is the period of rest and recuperation, during which the waste caused by the day's operations is eliminated, and new materials are woven into the body's structure. American Indians reckon time by sleeps, and so for that matter do we, for we think of a year as 12 months, or moons, so that our fundamental time measurement has to do with night. Now, during sleep, moreover, the plans and thoughts we have been concerned with during the day are ripened and brought to maturity. Thus, it is proverbial that night brings counsel. Many a problem has been solved subconsciously during the night. Our mental processes continue at subconscious levels, even while the cells of the upper brain are resting. It's during sleep, again, that our aspirations and efforts are built into organic structure. What we have thought and done during the waking hours goes on influencing the body while we sleep, and this is why it is so advantageous to review each day before falling asleep. This practice enables us to appraise our conduct. We see where we have fallen short, and vigorously determine to do better the next time we find ourselves in a similar situation. We intensify the effect of all our well-doing by this mental repetition of the original actions or thoughts, and then, before composing ourselves for slumber, we once more bring before us, as clearly as we can, the image of that which is our highest and truest desire. By this means, we actually build our aspirations into our flesh and blood, impressing our dominant desire upon every cell in our body. The title, The Moon, is a direct reference to the subconsciousness and its powers of duplications, reproduction, reflection, of the turning back of energy towards its source. In its deeper meaning, the moon symbolizes the path of return, the return of a prodigal son to his father's house. The ancient esoteric maxim is plainly concealed in the symbolism of this key. First the stone, then the plant, then the animal, and then the man. If you examine the picture closely, you will see stones at the margin of the pool. Now, I don't know if I can do this or not on the fly, but I'm going to try. I'm pretty sure Paul Foster Case is talking about his card. And I'm going to try to, I know it's dark. Give me just a second and I will throw his card in there. The Case Moon card. There it is. Let's fit this sucker to the screen. Boom. Remember, in Paul Foster Case's cards, you can get a blank deck and he has you color the cards. Again, like if you're a student of the tarot and the Kabbalah, but specifically I would say the tarot, you're missing out if you don't take their tarot course. It takes time to go through it all, color the cards, the meditations, everything, but damn, is it good. All right, so first the stone, then the plant, then the animal, then the man. If you examine the picture closely, you will see stones at the margin of the pool. Just beyond them are the pointed leaves of a water plant, and the vegetation continues in the field beyond. Climbing onto the path is a low form of animal life, a crustacean, and a little further along are a dog and a wolf. Then come the towers, human structures, but the path continues even beyond them. The pool below is the same as that of the 14th and 17th keys. It is the great deep of cosmic mind stuff out of which emerges the dry land of physical manifestation. From it all organic life proceeds. The crawfish, or the crayfish, is a crustacean, hard-shelled. He represents, in the negative sense, selfishness, crabbedness, and obstinacy. But in the good sense, he represents persistence, inflexibility of purpose, determination, and tenacity of purpose. It represents also the first stages of unfoldment, wherein the student still thinks of himself as being separated from the rest of nature. The dog and the wolf, they belong to the same fundamental genus, the canine family, but the wild, dangerous wolf, inimical to man, is what is produced by nature without human adaptation and interference. The dog is the result of the modifications effected in the wolf's kind by human thought. Men tame dogs and modify their structure by crossbreeding. Thus here we have in the symbolism a specific reference to the control of body consciousness and the development of form by human intelligence. As I've said in the analysis of the tarot, the dog is a symbol of art, while the wolf is a symbol of nature. The path goes between these two extremes, for it is the way of balance, the way or method which neither goes too far towards artificially, nor makes the mistake of supposing that everything can be left to the ungoverned expression of nature or natural impulses. It progresses over undulating ground, so that it is a succession of accents or ascents and descents. Our progress is not an unbroken upward climb all the time. We attain one eminence after another, and after reaching every lesser peak, we apparently go downhill for a little time. But this is only the surface appearance. We cannot be climbing all the time. There's a periodic time, or a waxing and waning, or a flux and reflux in everything that we do. Assimilation or taking in must be balanced by expression or giving out. Taking in energy has to be balanced by giving energy. Coming up with an idea in the mind and the subconscious and the imagery has to be balanced out by the acting and the will to act upon those energies. So periods of intense effort must be followed by periods of rest as well. The flux and reflux of work and sleep. And since the path rises over rolling ground as one advances, there comes a time when the lowest point of descent is a higher stage than a peak of a previous attainment. So what he's saying is higher highs and higher lows. Not so if you're even when you are going after your goals and you reach a peak, eventually you're going to go and you're going to fall again. But that lower peak is not going to be as low as the peak before it when you were at your low before that. So you can imagine you're going to climb consciously like in a wave frequency, but it's going to be going up. So long as we do this, we may be sure that we are progressing, even in those periods when it seems that we can't study, that we can't do anything but just rest. The towers have battlements and form a gateway. The suggestion of the design is that each tower is connected with the wall, and the occult interpretation I have received is that this is the wall of ordinary limits of human sensation and perception. But this is not the final boundary. There is a vast region of experience beyond this, and the way which leads into that region is open for all who will follow it. The moon is so drawn that it has 16 principal and 16 secondary rays, although in the picture some of the secondary rays near the top of the design are not very clear. Thus there are 32 rays, and this number 32 is first of all the number of the paths on the tree of life, consisting of the 10 forces or sephirah that correspond to the numbers 1 through 10, and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, or the 22 forces that are represented by the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the tarot keys. Hence, the rays of the moon represent the sum total of cosmic forces at work in human personalities. In this card, 18 yods fall from the moon onto the path. And the colored cards, they are partly red and partly yellow to to be the combination of solar energy, which is yellow, with the vital forces in the blood, which are red. The intimation is that the powers of the subconscious descend into the actual physical structure through the blood. The body is actually built from the elements in the bloodstream, and the chemistry of the bloodstream is controlled by the subconscious mental activity represented in this key by the moon. The way of attainment is the way of return. The beyond is really the source. The height to which the path leads is that whereon the hermit stands in key 9. Ancient teachers have left very clear descriptions of the way of attainment. They tell us it is narrow, meaning that concentration is required to follow it. More or less plainly, they intimate that this is a mode of life balance between the conditions of nature and such modifications of those conditions as are possible for the art. I told you this one was going to get deep, right? So the beginning of the way is in the realm of the familiar. It leads us by easy stages from the known to the lesser known, and from the less known to the extreme unknown. Every master of life has followed this path to its goal, which is self-recognition or correct perception of the true I am force, or the great I am. So, Paul Foster Case says, if you want to get into the moon card practically, maybe this week, try to start the practice of reviewing your day's activities just before you go to sleep. Do some introspection. If you're in the habit of writing a diary, that's the best possible means of reviewing one's attainments and failures. Our attainments are just the stepping stones to the progress towards self-realization. Our failures are but warnings of what to avoid in the future. What we call, quote, sin is nothing but missing the mark. Never muse too much about failures. Merely get the determination just not to repeat them anymore. There's no excuse for that. Don't worry. Worry is the concentration of the negative side of life. If you can worry well and at length, then you possess the ability to concentrate. So, remember, if you're good at worrying and you can focus on worrying and being negative, then guess what? That means you do have the ability to concentrate. But it's worthwhile to concentrate really on the positive side, not the negative side. Change the polarity of your thoughts and emotions in your daily life. Impress your subconsciousness before going to sleep with positive images. Persist in this practice, and the result will not fail to manifest themselves in all directions. Now, Paul Foster Case gives some more, like, I guess you could say, correspondences to each of the cards in his teachings. But I would learn the stuff in that order, right? Like I would if I was just going to do weights and golden dawns, I would read, the first book that I would read would be Robert Wang's book. And I would just study the hell out of that. And then I would get into Paul Foster Case's book, and then the Sefer Yetzirah, and then the Tree of Life. And then everything will just start adding up. So in this book, Paul Foster Case's Book of Wisdom, he has, this is called the organization, or the fourth stage of unfoldment. He also says that it corresponds with the Roman numeral 18, the key number 18, the Hebrew letter Kaf. The value of that letter is 100. It means the back of the head. And the Kabbalistic intelligence of the 32 paths of wisdom, he states here too, that it's the corporeal intelligence, or the physical body and material tangible. The power and aspect of the consciousness here is organization. The astrology sign that it's under is actually Pisces. The human faculty, or the hidden meaning of the human faculty, is actually sleep. The color is red-violet. The note is B. The path on the tree is the 29th path of Netzach to Malkuth. On the cube of space in the Sephirot Sirah, it is actually the southern or below region. And in alchemy, especially metal transformation of alchemy, it is the level of multiplication. So, like I said, man, this is a deep one. But just to sum this up, I want to tell you that the reason why I harp on this stuff so much is because there is so much growth that can happen on this path. To intellectually understand things under the sun is really cool. You know, it really is. When we get downloads intellectually, it's great. But the hardest work, and I'm going to be a little vulgar here, but I need to explain this. The hardest work of soul growth, in my opinion, is, especially in the first stages, is the path of Kof. Here. This is where every reason why we do everything and every action that we take is based upon our subconscious programming and our deepest desires and our blocks and our abundant mindsets. I guess you could just say the subconscious is running everything. And when we grow spiritually, we tend to have successes in life, which I can give you my example. Growing the show and the business and the station, it led me all over the United States for the past 3 years. Then it put me into Florida, and I lived on the beach for 2 years, and I met people, and I really got to know myself more, but I also got to know some deeper shit sides of myself that I needed to fix. Now, I'm back here in the shack. It seems like I'm less than I was, like I have less than I did before, but that's not true. I have the wisdom of that whole experience. And two, I know so much more about myself deeper than ever. Some of the subconscious programming that I wasn't even aware of now, more than ever. And so when I start this path upon the frequency of flux and reflux, the next peak that I'm going to get to is going to be even higher than the one before. On what level? Who knows? I mean, on the level that I imagine. So not only does it teach us about the subconscious and just how horrifying it can be, but it also teaches us that when we have the strength to see our programs and that the higher self is trying to contact us through our sleep, that the more we come in contact with this, the more that we understand it, the less that we're a slave to it, the less we work upon this side of ourselves, and the more we don't care about it, the more we're a slave to our fears and all of the sorceric things that are going on inside of us and in the world. So when you guys look at this path, I want you to look at that long winding path that's shown in both the weight card and the Wang card. And what lies beyond it is magnificent once you understand the polarity of things that's really going on. The moon is a tough aspect. It really is. This is why in your astrological chart, if you study your north node and south node, you can almost get a really big hint, if not a revelation, of what your soul is needing to work on upon this path. What's being delivered to you from the higher self, or I guess in this system, the high priestess that's delivering to you through your dreams, through the symbols that the higher self has given you, through your synchronicities, and here on the earth, what you need to work on. So I don't want to get too personal with you about it and reveal my chart, but I happen to be a Cancer moon, so this card really is a massive awakening to me. And yeah, it's been tough, but it's so rewarding. So remember, when you feel failure, when you feel down, or when you feel like you're just being run by magical things or dark magic or sorcery, or you're a victim to things or whatever, here's where you got to have strength to get into control of what you're imagining, what you believe, what you see in the deepest parts of your mind, being able to tap into the unconscious and have the strength to overcome it and push through. And if you don't, and you become a victim to this, well, we all know what can happen when our emotions and all of these programs run our lives on an entire level. It can destroy us in so many different ways. All right, so I hope you understand this card a little bit more. I'll leave links to the books that I talked about here. I know that I went a little long and a lot deeper into this one, but now we have gone through, let's just say, all of the paths that are the first initiatory paths that go from the body to the higher self. First, we talked about, let's say, the universe, the balance of the two. The mystic devotional path shows us the balance between our intellect and our emotions. We've also studied the next level on the intellectual side, which is the sun. So the next one will naturally be the star. Looking forward to it. We're getting there. And later on, we'll be releasing some really cool stuff having to do with this. But if you're going through this whole series with me and you're even studying more about it, once we release what we're going to release here on the channel and for the members and all this, dude, you're going to be so glad that you studied this stuff and understood it, because you can do what you want to with this whole system personally, but just remember there are several tools to understand these principles. This is one tool. All right. Don't want to ramble on. We'll see you on the next path.